Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Bill. I'm just going to try to do a super condensed version of my conversion testimony. I know this will be the third one I've did. The first one clocking in at a grand 5.5 hours, which was a no-go. Then I did one that was 2.5 hours, and that's okay for people who have time. But I want to see if I can actually pull off the impossible and do something in 20 minutes. Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about when I was a kid, my childhood. Basically, I'm born in the 70s, 1970. So pretty much the time I could start thinking, probably like around 5 or 6 years old. 1975, 1976. I got a brother who's older than me 5 years. I got a sister who's about a year and a half younger than me. Let's see what stands out in my mind as far as childhood goes. There wasn't really much talk about religion or Jesus Christ, although we did have some Bibles in our house. Most of the things I learned about Jesus or the prophets or anything to do with the Bible when I was 6 or 7 years old came from things like television shows, the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, Jesus of Nazareth. So we'd watch these programs as they were on TV. So 6, 7 years old, that was my formal introduction to what the Bible was and who Jesus was. In our house, we did not say prayers. We did not say grace before we ate. We didn't talk about the Bible, and we never talked about Jesus Christ. It was very superficial in that regard. Like most families who are living east of the Mississippi on the East Coast during that time, kids get brought up and they get raised in something called Roman Catholicism, which we now know is absolutely not Christianity. It really has very little to do with it. So, probably around the time I'm 8 years old, I get sent to something called catechism, which is basically 1 day a week for like 2 hours a day, and they prepare you. It's something through the Catholic Church, and they prepare you to do things like a first holy confession or a first Holy Communion. Now, based on what I remember about catechism and the preparation for those Catholic rituals, I probably learned more from TV about Jesus than I did in catechism. So very superficial, and that was how that went. Also, in that regard, as a baby, I was actually baptized, which now, if you're a born-again Christian who's in the Bible and knows about the Bible, you know that baptism as a baby is absolutely useless, it's unbiblical, and it makes no difference in anyone's life at all. So that seems worthy of saying. So basically, I had no introduction to real Christianity at any time in my life, just a superficial background into Roman Catholicism and some of the rituals that occur through the church. My home life was kind of stressed. I was kind of the middle kid. My dad was a pretty intense individual. My mom was fairly compassionate and a good person by all accounts. We didn't have a lot of expressions of love in our house or with our family. No one said I love you. Love was something that was more told that we were. We were told we were loved by the things that were done for us. In other words, it was almost as if to say, well, it's your birthday and things were given to you. That shows that we love you. What we do for you is what shows our love for you. We don't have to say it. So it was kind of a skewed interpretation now as a mature adult who understands what love really is. Kind of a skewed perception on what love is, and that was kind of the norm in our household. Feelings were held back. It was a bit difficult for me because in my family there was also my dad was kind of a very stressed out person, and there would be frequent bouts of rage that I can remember all through my pre-adolescence and early teenage years. Also was subjected to, I'm not trying to toss dirt around, I'm just trying to get it out there so you get an idea where my background is coming from. I did witness a lot of incidences of domestic violence and abuse of that nature, and I think that kind of had an effect on me as we get older, and it puts you in a position where in those early times, you don't express love. Love is not expressed. Anger, there's always a format for anger, and there's always a format for some sort of violence. So that was kind of a skewered thing as well, worth mentioning because it gives a little bit of depth into the character that I'm coming into and being subjected to, and it seems relevant. All that being as it is and as it may, probably by the time I'm 9, 10 years old, you're looking for those forms of escapism. You're dealing with going through grade school and middle school, and you're looking for that form of escapism, and you just kind of have these self-defense mechanisms that develop that keep you away from the things that are at home that you can't really process because you're too young to figure it out. So like a lot of many other kids in my area, we turned on to this new thing called music television, and right away I really liked music. It was something that influenced me, and it had an impact on me. It acted as a catalyst to bring some things out of me, to maybe feel good when I needed to feel good. And so I bought right into that the whole music paradigm, and got really interested in it and used it to pull myself away from other things and give me a point of focus and interest. And actually, it didn't take too long once I started getting into music where I became highly interested, as well as many other people in the area where I was, into the darker forms of music, things like Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, Led Zeppelin. Those were all very early introduced to me, so I was getting into that, and a lot of other people very early. I mean, I'm talking, I smoked my first joint when I was 12 years old, my first cigarette when I was 11 years old. So very early on, we get pulled into dark forms of music and using marijuana and cigarettes and drinking. So that's worth saying, that's introduced at that point in time as well. And just to reiterate and touch on it, obviously by that point, even the very superficial introductions and that I had to things like Christianity or Bibles or the superficial practices of the Catholic Church, they were out the window by the time I was 12 years old. They kind of just faded away. And I always make an interesting analogy, and just like when you reach a certain age, you realize that the tooth fairy isn't real. Okay, then you reach a certain age, maybe when you're like 10, and you say, "Hey, man, the Easter Bunny's not real." Okay, and then you reach a certain age and you say, well, Santa Claus is not real. So in the same way, interestingly enough, because the Easter Bunny was always paired up with the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which I even had problems with back then. I didn't understand. So if the Easter Bunny's not real, what's this thing about Jesus Christ? Then you hear about Christmas. Well, Santa Claus ain't real. Why are we learning about Jesus Christ? The devil's very clever in that regard, that he pairs the two up. So my pursuit or interest in Christianity went about the same way as the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, or Santa Claus in that regard also, we're saying. So I was pretty much done with that by the time I started using darker forms of music to create a focus for myself, and also smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, and smoking marijuana by the time I'm 12, and well into it by the time I'm 13. It was also around that time, 12 or 13 years old, being interested in the music. Everybody was getting guitars or playing drums, and that was the time I got my first guitar and got really focused on that, and it was really a major form of escapism for me. It also helped to give me an identity for the first time, trying to learn to master that instrument and play some of the songs from my heroes and things like that. So music became big. So everything was kind of introduced all within a couple of year period, playing heavy metal guitar, getting a guitar, smoking pot, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, seeking escapism. So you get the picture. I was kind of moving in that direction very early on. But by the time I was 16, I wasn't the best student in school. I always had learning disability problems. I didn't give a crap about school. That was not my thing. I didn't want to pay attention. I had other plans. I seen, you get into the MTV generation and you see all these people, these rock stars on TV. Now we're talking the late 80s. You got White Snake, you got Guns N' Roses. I was into that full bore, and I knew pretty much right away, as early as the age of 15 or 16, that as soon as the opportunity would avail, that I was going to move to California. I wanted to move to California. I tried to recruit people, and everybody was like, yeah, when we were kids. But when it came down to the drawer, no one wanted to go, and I kept focus on that goal that I was going to go to California as soon as I can get myself out of school, get away from the house, and go and pursue this rock and roll thing, because I thought if, bands like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue and Rat, why didn't I have just as good of a chance? In that regard, it seemed like a positive thing for me to go that route, and I knew right away I wanted to go to California when I was a kid. So the summer of '88 comes around, and pretty much, my focus and my desires are coming to fruitions, and I have the opportunity to come out to California, and I do come out to California. Now from there, I'm taking with me many of the same things. I'm taking my past with me. I'm taking every I am. I'm taking my habits and my propensities with me, and then you add some other things into the mix. Being an 18-year-old kid out here in the wild, wild west for the first time, you get introduced to some other things. You're sowing some different wild oats, and that begins that process as well. My first couple of years out here, although I was being irresponsible and I was far from living a spiritual or a Christian lifestyle, absolutely not. I was definitely involved in fornication and the pride of life and the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh, and I did pursue those things. So I was in a lot of trouble, obviously, but didn't quite know it at that point. But mostly I managed to stay focused on practicing my guitar and making gains to become a better player so that I can step up to the plate and try to play and collaborate, doing music with other musicians who I might find. In the first couple of years, I'd say, 1989, 1990, and through 1991, I did manage to make some significant strides and improvements in my ability to play, and we did have a couple of people together. It's a couple different points where we played music, and it seemed to reach a plateau. The partying was consistent, the marijuana, the cigarettes, the alcohol, and the fornication, which was a new thing, being out here at West. It was all pretty steady. I think it was probably sometime in Hollywood. I don't know what it was. The principalities are pretty sneaky and shifty. We got all these various bookstores, and I remember going into a place that was over on La Palma. It was a place called Pan's, and it was like a black magic store. And I remember walking into there, and I remember kind of thinking it was a joke, but now I don't think it's a joke. I remember it, and I would ask the guy all sorts of questions and things like that. You like bands, you like Black Sabbath, because you see the imagery from there. So there was a little bit of an interest at that point, but not really too much in anything like that. But clearly I was already far into the devil's music, to his lifestyle. So I was kind of in trouble at that point, though I couldn't quite realize it and had plateaued out on my drug and alcohol use. So it didn't seem like it was going overboard yet. And but that changes. Some stuff changes up a little bit in the summer, I want to say, or the winter of 1991 or early 92. I meet a girl, and she's a musician as well, and she works at a bank, and I had this huge crush on her. I was the kind of guy, I'd been with the same girl, my high school sweetheart, my whole life up until that point, so I hadn't had a lot of experience in relationships. I just had the relationship with my high school sweetheart and just messing around and fornicating, one-night things and parties and stuff like that. So I met this girl, and I really kind of fell for her, and I would bring flowers into her at the bank, and I ended up making a big withdrawal, and I took her out, and her and I developed a relationship for about 6 or 7 months, and it was kind of interesting. I kind of really fell for her, hook, line, and sinker. She wasn't like anybody I'd ever seen or met before, and she was really beautiful and gorgeous, and so I fell for her. And what ends up happening is I get married to her, but the marriage is short-lived. It's only we only stay married for a year and a half. We're together a total of 3 years when the whole thing is said and done. When she left, it was, we were kids, and I couldn't even have been 23 years old when it ended. And at that point, being the kind of guy I was, who was very emotional, kind of skewered from my adolescent influences and the things I was pursuing, which were all ego-based and superficial, not having a very good structure and discipline or real love, expressions of love. It kind of hit a wall, basically what happens. And when that relationship ended, it just kind of did something to me. Probably not unique in that regard. A lot of people experience what we'd call their first heartbreak. But I was the kind of guy, because of my background and where I was coming from and what was happening with me and what I was using and doing and what I was into, what really affected me in a sort of adverse and negative way. So it kind of crushed me. And I want to say sometime after that, by the time the summer of 92, 93 comes around, there becomes a little bit more of a perceptible change in me. Whereas before it was all party, it was all good time, and in some aspects it was naivety. I started to become angry. and a little bit bitter about things. And at that time, though I hadn't really addressed God much, I mean, I had a kind of a spirituality, because there were points, back in the 1990, 91, in that relationship with her, her and I, we were the kind of people, we go up in the hills, we'd read tarot cards under the full moon, and I would walk by myself in the woods sometimes, and I would talk to what I thought was a higher principality or God, and I'd share my thoughts with him, and I wanted to believe that he was there, and that there was spirituality. But when that thing happened with her, I kind of really turned on that entity that I would speak to, and I kind of put my fist in the air and basically said, look, man, I don't know why you made this happen, God, but this is your fault. Why did you make her do this to me? You just kind of play that it's not your fault because of our stupidity. We got to blame it on somebody. So being the incomplete, unchristian person that I chose to blame the whole thing on God, and that's when I made an active turn into occultism. Once I shook my fist at the air and said, God, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. This is your fault. What ends up happening is I'm in a bookstore, one night, and then pretty much for the first time, I didn't even know it existed. I see a book by a guy named Anton LaVey. It's called The Satanic Bible, and I pick that up and I start reading it. And in the very beginning, I remember there's like the precepts of this philosophy are, you got to be responsible for yourself, and it just seemed like it was the first. I don't know what it was. The spirituality and the principalities lined it up to be almost like a self-help book to get me out of my situation. Told you it was okay to feel hate. You just had to learn to channel it so you can get rid of it and move on. So there I was. That's where I got duped. And I started getting into the philosophy of Anton LaVey and reading those kind of books. Interestingly enough, right around that time too, the band that I had always dreamed of putting together actually got put together. I came together with a bunch of guys who were actually into the same thing that I was, occultism, dark subject matter, and we put together a band that was right out of the voices, right out of the imagination in my head. Everybody wearing black, candles, pentagrams, and the band was called Damon Kane, and it was actually so the dark side reciprocated and gave that band over to all of us, and we all collectively met, and the music starts coming out. So now we're actually all living the lifestyle. We wear black, we wear pentagrams around our neck, we swear allegiance to the dark side, we play music that glorifies the dark side. So now we're in full bore as far as our philosophy and where we stand. Also immediately in those days, now we're talking about 1996, 1997, some of the drug use I started getting into and experimenting with was harder. I started drinking harder alcohol. That was when I first started experimenting with drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine, and those things give birth to some darker kind of mindsets, and I believe I was infiltrated by darker mindsets and possibly some demonic inhabitation during that time because of the things I was into and opening myself up to, and the heavier drugs that I was taking at that time. So probably a lot of the damage that I incurred spiritually was done during that time. But there was also a part of me that didn't believe it. That there was a part of me that was a rational person that said, well, this is just a philosophy, and it's just cool, and it gets behind the band. But nonetheless, what it did and what it was doing was true and clear. That time period and that music and those people that I were hanging around with in that time, something happened where a lot of people were just kind of fading out or spinning off and going crazy, but for some reason I was able to keep a grip on myself. I knew when it was getting too far. There might have been people around me who were using methamphetamine, and I would use it with them, but when they spun off and went to jail, what's that guy? He can't control his high. And before I knew it, everybody around me was gone, and I was left by myself. And then I started to deal with the members of my band, and I started to see there was indifference, and the band, after less than 4 years, ended up disbanding. And when all those people fell away and those circumstances and logistics fell away, and the band fell away, and the members of the band fell away, I was just kind of left standing with myself and my black clothes and my pentagrams, and I said, this is all really kind of silly and stupid, so I think I'm just going to step out of this and look for something else at this point. I don't know, I can only guesstimate that the dark side must have been pretty disappointed at that point if there were certain demons that were assigned to me, which now I'm sure there were. They must have been saying, darn it, he's out. We needed him to keep doing the drugs. We needed him to destroy himself. We needed him to get into rituals, and he didn't do it. He backed out too early. And it was almost as if the forces of darkness lifted up and were planning how they were going to come back at me, and it was pretty clever the way they work it, and I'm going to move forward with that now. So I go through a phase where I'm like, okay, I'm getting rid of all these black clothes, and I don't want to read these books anymore. It's just kind of silly. I'm going to go and try to figure this thing out. And it was right around that time, interestingly, that I met a person who started giving me books on subjects like Buddhism, and I remember thinking, this is a little bit more middle of the road. So the devil can't get you one way, he gets you another way, because Buddhism and Satanism, it all does the same thing. If it turns you away from Jesus Christ, I don't have to tell you guys that, it's all going to take you to the same place in the end of the day. So the devil regroups. He doesn't destroy me through drug and alcohol use or black magic, so he backs off when he sees I walk away from him, and then he comes at me in another form. He sends a person to me in the form of someone who's an enlightened person, and he wants to introduce me to these new books. So I pick up this philosophy of Buddhism and Eastern mysticism, guys like Shinzing Young and the Dalai Lama and Alan Watts, and I'm like, yeah, man, this is a little bit more for me. And I get into a phase where I'm getting into that, and I kind of reset my calibration and start moving forward, and I'm living kind of a hippie lifestyle at that point, and put the past and the darkness behind me. And at one point towards the end of that phase, I'm living in my pickup truck, and I almost think now in retrospect, I almost got in touch with God again, because I remember laying in back of my truck and almost apologizing to him in some nights when I turn and say, Lord, I'm sorry, I was so mad at you about that stuff. And I remember I felt like maybe I was making some recompense with him, and it went on for a couple of years like that. I'm studying Eastern mysticism. I'm still partying. I'm still using the occasional cocaine. I kick off the methamphetamine. I'm definitely still smoking pot. That was an addiction that ended up lasting 27 years along with cigarettes, only till 2011. So, but it's not as dark. There's not as much hatred, and there's not as much anger. The anger is dissipating. The hatred is dissipating. I'm actually, and for the first time in my life at this point, I meet a friend out in the streets, because I'm living this nomadic hippie lifestyle, and he starts taking me to these church feeds that are going on in my area. So 7 nights a week, I'm going to different churches, and there's various points, people are evangelizing me, and I'm kind of open to it, but not really accepting it, but they're feeding me. So I start to get softened up. I'm starting to feel like this dark black anger phase where I'm just hating everybody and everything and rebelling against everything and trying to make it for everything it's worth. It starts to get a little bit more mellow now, because I'm in the churches, I'm getting food from them, I'm being evangelized, I'm meeting people, and I'm finding a niche, and I'm starting to feel a little bit of love. I'm starting to get a little bit of love. I'm still playing in bands. My modus operandi has changed. I'm hiring myself out as like a bass player, and I'm playing with various bands. I'm looking to do it more and more, but it's not really happening. There seems to be a limitation on it, but I'm playing in 2 or 3 bands at that point, making a little bit of money, not much, but music was a constant. I always knew it was always music that kept me going, the pursuit of music, because I still believed, that as long as I was motivated, at some point the music pursuits would pull off. So I always stayed doing music, and whatever my mindset was, or whatever my substance abuse problems were. And at that time, I remember dating. It was mostly one night stands, a lot of fornication. But what would happen at that point is, because of my lifestyle, I'd date a girl, and I would want to have a long-term relationship, but it would never work out, because as soon as they found out my situation, even though they liked me, Mr. Rock and Roll, they kicked me on down the line as soon as they knew that I wasn't working a steady job and I was living this nomadic lifestyle. In 2000, I met the woman who would become my wife for, over a decade, the woman who I was with for nearly 13 years. at that time, I didn't have any grand expectations. I met her, we talked, I dated her for a short amount of time, and I figured the same thing was going to happen after some initial fooling around. She'd get rid of me. A nice girl, a wise woman, education, associate's degrees, master's degrees. I figured, she's going through a wild kick and she's going to kick me on out. It doesn't turn out to be that way. And she's the first one, when I was kind of dabbling in Eastern philosophy, when I first met her, she was reading a book by a man called Autobiography of a Yogi by a man named Paramahansa Yogananda, who headed up something called the Self-Realization Fellowship. And she gave me that book, and I don't know, the principalities in the darkness must have been working. The devil comes as many forms. The Bible tells us that it could even masquerade as an angel of light. And when I read that book, Autobiography of a Yogi, it just crashed something open to me, and it started this phase, not only where I was in a relationship with her, a live-in relationship with her for the next few years, doing all my things, still taking drugs, still addicted to marijuana, still playing in bands, but I started to supplement, my life with her and all my other things with this philosophy of self-realization. Now, I don't want to get into the whole philosophy of the Self-Realization Fellowship, but all I can say in short is this, is that the last book that I ended up reading all of his books, The Divine Romance, Whispers from Eternity, Autobiography of a Yogi, Sayings of Paramahansa Yogananda, but the last book he wrote called The Second Coming, just to give you an idea, you want to research the Self-Realization Fellowship and find out what a blasphemy of the Bible it is. He puts himself on par with Jesus Christ, and he equates the second coming of Jesus Christ not as a physical thing, but as a manifestation of our spirit being reborn, and basically telling you that you are on the level with Christ and you will rule and be with Him. If it's no repentance, no sin, nothing like that. So, boy, did I get duped. So I got really into that philosophy for the next few years. Also during that time, right as soon as I finished up all the books from the Self-Realization Fellowship and Paramahansa Yogananda, doing my initiation into Kriya Yoga, taking the SRF lessons, the re-energizing lessons, and all the way in. I was part of the Fullerton Temple there for a while, the SRF Fullerton. I was at the Lake Shrine, I got into, someone passed me on something on a college campus by another author by the name of Abhay Chen Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, who was the original founder of something called the Hare Krishna movement. And again, in the same type of manner, I just got read in. I was going into vegetarianism at that time, and just at the time I'm going into vegetarianism, I read this guy's comments and I get sucked in like a vacuum into this philosophy of this Hare Krishnaism, and I get into that for probably a good 2 years, reading all the books, almost every book that he wrote, and I'm just getting deeper and deeper into these occult, non-Christian philosophies, and I call them occult because now I know as a Christian, and I'm not going to get into this too much because I want to keep moving forward, is that if you're reading Anton LaVey, Paramahansa Yogananda or Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, Satan and his angels are equally as satisfied, because it doesn't matter if you're just calling up black demons or whether you're calling yourself Christ and putting yourself on par with Christ, or calling a Hindu god the ultimate Godhead. Satan is equally satisfied with all of it because it all does the same thing. Points you away from the Bible and away from Jesus Christ, and that's how we all end up losing in the end of the day. Now I'm going to move forward. It was probably, and a similar thing happened. I felt like I had assimilated. I almost felt like I had come of age by 2006 or 2007. I had evolved myself into this person where, I came through the lowly ranks of Catholicism. I ventured off. I went into the darkness of Anton LaVey. I learned about the pragmatism and the beauty of Buddhism. Then I found the devotion of Hare Krishnaism and self-realization. And I almost felt like but I was actually living like I felt there was a deception that was over me, that I was fully evolved, that I had become fully evolved. And by 2008, 2009, I wasn't a spiritual person anymore. I believed that there was a spiritual component of this life, and that something would happen when we pass away. But Satan had succeeded, and all the
roads that he had taken me through, and that what ultimately ended up happening was I believed through the practice of the Hinduism and through the Buddhism and through the self-realization exercises and their techniques and their writings that ultimately I was a good person. So he got me. That's where the Satan's false doctrine got me. I believed that if I died, it wouldn't matter. I'd been a good person. I'd evolved myself, and even if I didn't chant Hare Krishna, or even if I wasn't a regular participant at the self-realization fellowship. So what happens is basically what I become. My religion becomes threefold. I become a pragmatic, existentialist, perfectionist. That's where everything had got me, to a level of pragmatism, existentialism, and perfection. That means I believed anything that I can accomplish was going to come down to what I put into it is what I was going to get out of it. So Satan put the blinders right over my eyes, and he did it with three philosophies. He did it with Buddhism, he did it with cultic Satanism, and he did it with self-realization fellowship. That's how he did it. And it took him a long time, but because I was at a point where people would try to evangelize me, Christians at that point, and they would say to me, what do you think of Jesus Christ? And I just like a parrot, I'd repeat the line that says, well, he was a great teacher. He was a bodhisattva. And they said, no, but do you accept him as your Lord and Savior? And I would say, that's ridiculous. No. So there it was. It took Satan 5 or 6 years longer than it took him to deceive some of my counterparts when I first got into occultism. But ultimately, he pulled off what he needed to pull off. Now I'm going to move forward. When my relationship went awry, which I have all the details of in my extended testimony, with my wife, and that relationship subsequently ended, I was not equipped to deal with that. I walked into court without an attorney, lost many of the things I'd grown accustomed to and attached to in many capacities, and I suffered a logistical and a mental and emotional breakdown. Without any consideration for the spiritual implications of it, I knew at that point, which I explained in my testimony, all the details of, that I wanted to do something of committing suicide. I talk about how I was not the kind of person who would jump off a building or put a gun to my head. I was seeking to find a way maybe to do an overdose. I talk about that in detail, and I say that, I couldn't get the right amount of prescription medications. I had some lorazepam and benzodiazepine, but did some research and found out it took like 5,000 milligrams to kill a laboratory rat, and even all that I could muster up was not enough, half enough to kill a laboratory rat. Someone sent me a link about starvation and dehydration. I explained how I was a very competitive athlete at that point, and I would cut large amounts of weights at 6'2". I would dehydrate my body and deplete it very heavily, so I knew how to do that, and I thought that the road for me was going to be to stop eating and stop drinking. When I began my fast, I explained in my extended testimony that I weighed just under 140 pounds at 6'2". As I'm talking to you today, I'm almost 180, and people still say I'm thin. So I was down 140, 130 pounds. I stopped eating for nearly 2 weeks, all food at that point. Probably got down to 130 pounds. Did not drink any water for almost a week, was completely dehydrated. My plan was to check into a hotel room, take what was left of my benzodiazepines and lorazepam, and fall asleep in the bathtub and die. My extended testimony, I talk about how much supernatural things began to happen as the death process was occurring. And basically what ends up happening is during that process, over that 2-week process in 2012, where I was trying to commit suicide and slowly killing myself, and nothing was going to turn me around. I had no fear about what was going to come afterwards. I have 4 or 5 encounters during that time with people who are trying to evangelize me. They are trying to give me holy Bibles, and they're telling me that the road, without even knowing me, they never met me before, that what's happening with me, I need to turn it around. And I explain those supernatural encounters in detail on my extended testimony. That's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So if you're interested in them, you could either ask me or you can go hear them. I explain on the extended testimony that I think it's all really nice. I think it's sweet. And, being someone who knew, based on some of the philosophies of self-realization and Hare Krishnaism and Buddhism, that people being able to know what's going on, I thought it was just a process of the universe and people were empathizing with me. And I thought, oh, how nice, these Christian people telling me that they think I should turn it around, even though they don't know me. Well, this is just a supernatural thing, but it was gentle and it wasn't prodding. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to keep going on this process. And it actually encouraged me to think that maybe things were going to be okay. Well, maybe this was God's way of communicating with me. He felt bad for me. He was trying to get people to turn me around. But I didn't know at that time, which becomes obvious, that these are warnings that these people are posting. And at one point, I actually do something long before I ever read any parts of the Bible. I land back in my car, and just for good measure, I was doing Buddhist Ho'oponopono prayers. I was doing Maha Mantras or Hare Krishnas. And I say to myself, well, let me try something new. And I do something on this last night, before I believe I would have collapsed and checked into the hotel room, where I take deep breaths and I say, help me Jesus, help me God, help me Jesus, help me Lord. And I repeat that, and basically what happens is 12 or 13 hours later, I go to sit someplace, and I won't say it any other way, because there is no other way to say it. Instead of people coming at me with Bibles, the manifestations of demons, of hell, manifested through the flesh of 12 people who I was sitting in a room with at a temporary agency. They read my mind. They talked about me. They told me they were going to kill me. And I began this process where, for the first time in the whole process, for the first time ever really in my life, I felt a fear like I never felt before. I was isolated from everybody, my family, my friends. I was dying. I was alone, and supernatural things happened. I jumped in my car. All the details of this are in it. I was being followed. People were appearing in front of me. They were appearing in back of me. At one point, I decide I'm going to break the fast. I talk about it, and I take a drink of water. I meet an angelic character who basically I open up to, and he tells me he knows what's going on with me. He tells me I need to be baptized. And so on March 12th at 11:45, I threw my hands up in the air, 2012, and I said, I get it, Lord. I don't need to be convinced any further. I know you're real. I fell under what's called the conviction of the Holy Spirit. It became very clear to me in those hours, the morning hours of March 12th of 2012, that I had been a sinner, and that this had been about my my blasphemy and my denial of the Lord Jesus Christ. From every time every person had asked me, do you accept him as your Lord and Savior, I said, no, he was a great teacher. Or every time that I knew it was collectively about every mistake I'd ever made, intuitively, where I turned myself away from Jesus Christ, and I turned myself into my own pragmatic, existentialist, perfectionist God who had no one else to answer to but myself, and who was going to be okay anyway. I knew that was a delusion. I knew that Jesus Christ was who he said he was. He was actively putting people in front of me. I was being completely convicted of my sin. I knew everything I ever done wrong to every person. And on that morning, I threw my hands up in the air and I said, Lord, please give me just a little time to figure this out. And basically, there was some scary stuff that happened 12 or 13 hours after that, but I rode out that storm, and I found my way, and on March 19th, 2012, I was baptized. And it's been a walk that I explain all the details in my extended testimony. I was lost, I got found, I was blind, now I see. And that's what happened. And there's no mistaking what happened to me, and there's no mistaking that Jesus Christ is who he said he was. And that's my short testimony. Hopefully it's short. God bless you, everybody, and thanks for listening. And please check out the long testimony for all the details, because I'm talking faster than I've ever talked before on this, and it's probably still going to be 45 minutes long. I just don't know how to make it any shorter. Thank you, everybody.